So here's a thought. What if a woman's reproductive health, when she goes through menopause, could actually tell us something important about her heart? It might sound like two totally separate things, but today we're diving into this really cool genetic study that connects them, and it tackles a question that's been bugging doctors for, well, decades.
And this is really the big question, right? Could going through menopause early actually be a warning sign for your heart? I mean, for years, doctors have seen these little hints that there might be a connection. But is it just one of those things that happens at the same time, a coincidence? Or is there something real, something deeper going on here? That's what we're going to find out.
Okay, so first things first, let's get on the same page with the terminology. We're talking about a condition called premature ovarian insufficiency, or POI for short. Now, this isn't just, early menopause. This is when the ovaries stop working the way they should before a woman even hits 40. And that's a huge deal. It affects pretty much everything, from fertility to hormone levels.
And get this isn't some super rare thing. POI affects somewhere between 3 and almost 12% of women. Let that sink in. That means as many as 1 out of every 10 women could be dealing with this. So yeah, it's a major public health issue that we absolutely need to be paying attention to.
And all of this brings us right back to that core scientific puzzle. For a long time, doctors and researchers have noticed this pattern. Women with POI seem to have more heart problems. But here's the thing. Noticing a pattern is one thing. Proving there's a direct link, that is a whole different ballgame.
So here's the big problem that all those earlier observational studies ran into. You can see two things happening at the same time, like women with POI having more heart attacks, but you can't be sure why. Is the POI actually causing the heart disease? Or could it be something else entirely? Lifestyle factors like diet or smoking that might be causing both. It's that classic scientific headache.
And that headache, that classic dilemma, actually has a name. It's the battle of correlation versus causation. Honestly, it's one of the most important ideas in all of science. And to really get what this new research did, you've got to understand this difference.
Okay, let's break this down with a super simple example. Correlation is just when two things happen at the same time. Think about ice cream sales and shark attacks. They both shoot up in the summer, right? But eating ice cream doesn't cause shark attacks, thank goodness. It's the summer heat that causes both. Now causation, that's direct. You flip a switch and the light turns on. One thing causes the other. See the difference?
So that leads us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? How in the world do you prove that one thing causes another when you've got all this other noise? All those lifestyle things like diet, exercise, or smoking that could be messing up your results. How do you filter all that out?
Well, the answer is incredibly clever. Seriously. The researchers behind this study basically used our own DNA as a team of detectives. They used this really powerful method that looks at the genetic cards we're all dealt at birth to find out what's really going on.
This method is called Mendelian Randomization. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty brilliant. See, when we're conceived, we get a totally random mix of genes from our parents. Some of those genes might make us more likely to develop POI. And because that genetic lottery is completely random, it's kind of like nature is running a giant clinical trial for us, right at birth, one that's totally separate from any lifestyle choices we make later in life. So here's basically how it works. The scientists look at these tiny little variations in our DNA, they're called SNPs, and they find the ones that are strongly linked to POI. You can think of these genes as a built-in natural experiment. Since they were handed out randomly at birth, they have nothing to do with lifestyle. So people who happen to have these POI genes also have higher rates of heart disease. That's some really strong evidence that the POI itself is the culprit.
But, for this genetic detective work to actually hold up, it has to follow 3 really important rules. First, the genes they're looking at have to be strongly linked to POI. That's a must. Second, those same genes can't also be linked to other stuff, like smoking or diet. They have to be independent. And third, the genes can only affect heart health through POI, not through some other sneaky backdoor. If you can check all 3 of those boxes, you can be pretty darn confident in your results.
All right, so after setting up this amazing genetic experiment and crunching the numbers on massive data sets, what did our gene detectives actually find? What was the final verdict?
Well, the findings were incredibly specific, and that's what makes them so powerful. The study confirmed a direct causal link between POI and 2 specific conditions: coronary heart disease and ischemic stroke. That's the kind of stroke caused by a blood clot. But, and this is just as important, they found no causal link for the other things they looked at, like high blood pressure or heart failure.
So let's really zero in on that biggest finding. The data showed, loud and clear, that having the genes that predispose you to POI directly and causally increases your risk of developing coronary heart disease. That link doctors suspected for so long, it's not a coincidence, it's causal.
And they even put a number on it. The odds ratio was 1.048. Now, what that means in plain English is that a genetic predisposition to POI is linked to about a 5% higher risk of coronary heart disease. I know 5% might not sound like a huge number, but when you're talking about millions of people on a population level, that is a really significant finding.
And here is the visual proof, straight from the study itself. Now, don't worry about all the crazy numbers here. All you really need to see is that little diamond shape down at the bottom. The fact that it's sitting entirely to the right of that middle line, that's the scientific way of saying, yep, this is a real statistically significant link. It's the data that backs it all up.
But remember, this story isn't just about what they found. It's also about what they didn't find. The fact that this genetic link just wasn't there for things like heart failure or heart attacks, well, that shows just how precise this method is. It suggests that the biological pathway connecting POI to heart problems is very, very specific.
Okay, so what does all of this actually mean for real women, for their doctors, for the future of healthcare? Because this isn't just some dusty academic paper. This has some really crucial real-world implications.
This quote right here is the study's own main conclusion. Knowing that this link is causal means we need, and I'm quoting here, proactive cardiovascular risk management. In other words, a diagnosis of POI should basically be treated like a flashing yellow light, a clear warning sign that it's time to start paying much, much closer attention to heart health.
So if you only remember 3 things from this whole explainer, let it be these. Number 1, POI isn't just correlated with, it actually causes an increased risk for coronary heart disease and ischemic stroke. Number 2, these amazing genetic tools like Mendelian randomization are totally changing the game for how we understand disease. And number 3, and this is the most important one, this knowledge empowers women with POI and their doctors to get ahead of the curve and be proactive about heart health.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. This study used our genes to solve a medical mystery that's been around for decades. So just imagine, what other hidden health risks, what other secret connections are just waiting there to be uncovered, right in our own DNA? The future of medicine, well, it might be a lot closer than we think.